Hello, everyone. Thank you for joining us this morning. It is now 10:45, so we will get started. My name is Amanda Horner. I am the Safety and Mobility Planner with the Mid-America Regional Council. And of course, we want to welcome you to the Pathways to Vision Summit. We're excited to be hosting this summit in an effort to encourage our community to reduce traffic crash fatalities and serious injuries to zero. As a reminder, please turn mics and cameras off during our presentation. If you have questions, feel free to type them in the chat and we'll collect them to present to our panel at the end of the session. We will also allow at the end of the presentation, if you prefer to turn your mic on to ask questions as well. Oops, one second, there we go. Lost my notes. All right, so we want to take a quick moment just to recognize our summit planning partners represented here. Thank you to all of those that helped make this session or the series possible. A special thank you. This presentation is sponsored by Burns and McDonnell. We thank them for their contribution and dedication to the efforts of Vision Zero. So before we get into this session, we want to invite oh, I don't have that on this one. My apologies. Well, just so you guys know, we will have a special invitation for jurisdictions to take lessons learned from the Pathways to Vision Zero Summit and put them into action in our community. So Mark will be hosting a two-part workshop with subject matter experts designed to help you bring a policy and initial plan to make streets safe for everyone. So save the dates of, December 4th and 8th. Registration for that workshop will be open soon. So now we're here. We're going to welcome our panel. Each guest will be talking for a few minutes to introduce themselves and their experience with Vision Zero. But I'll quickly share who we are lucky to have with us today. We have Michael Kelly, who is the policy manager at Bike Walk KC. David Bengi is a city engineer with Jefferson City, Missouri. Aaron Bartlett is a regional program manager with the National Highway Traffic Safety Administration. Ashley Hand is a co-founder and partner at CityFi. And our moderator today is Councilman Eric Bunch with the City of Kansas City, Missouri. So up first, I am going to invite Michael Kelly to introduce himself. So Michael.
Thank you, Amanda, and good morning, everyone. Okay, great. So very, very briefly, I'm going to talk a little bit about Bike Walk KC and some of the work that we do in terms of our role for Vision Zero. So if we could go to the next slide. So very quickly, Bike Walk KC's mission is to redefine our streets as places for people to build a culture of active living. We work to make Kansas City a safer, better place to walk, cycle, or roll, and we do that through a number of different avenues. Next slide. So these are the main things that we'll do, and I'll spend just a little bit of time talking about each of these. So with regards to advocacy and policy, which is my wheelhouse, we advocate for policies, plans, and projects to improve the built environment and make our communities safer. And that includes the Vision Zero resolution that was recently adopted in Kansas City, Missouri, with the help and leadership of Councilman Bunch. Additionally, we run one of the largest education programs for biking and walking in the country, headed by our education director, Laura Steele. We are able to provide education in how to safely ride and walk in schools across the community and with adults as well. We are also involved in community planning. So when it comes to things like area plans and projects, we have a community planner on staff who helps us to understand those plans and work with communities to make those as beneficial for alternative modes as possible. And then we also run the area's bike share program. So if you're out and about in Kansas City or increasingly in some of the other communities and see a bike share bike, that is us. And so if we could go to my last slide. So there's a story that I want to share with all of you to kind of encapsulate why Vision Zero is so important for me and my organization. The person you see here is 9-year-old Israel Hill. Israel was visiting from Bakersfield, California last year with family. And he was playing with some friends over near the intersection of 23rd and Kensington on Kansas City's east side. He was on a bit of a sloped hill, and at some point he slipped and fell into the street, where he was unfortunately struck by a driver. In speaking with Israel's grandmother, she told me that the first time she saw her grandson was in a casket. And when we talk about this idea of creating safer streets for everyone, and this idea of what Vision Zero is supposed to encapsulate, I want everyone to think about people like Israel. Because the fact of the matter is that there are far too many stories like his, far too many families that are broken, and far too many opportunities that we are missing to create a safer built environment for everyone. With that, I will hand it back to Amanda, and I look forward to your questions.
Thank you, Michael. Up next, we have David. David, you're still muted.
How's that? Is that better? Great. Good morning, everyone. Yeah, I'm here today to talk a little bit about the role that engineering plays in as we look at Vision Zero. So, man, if you would like to move to the next slide. So engineering, you might be aware or not, but certainly plays a very large role in both the design of our roadways, the design of our cars, and then ultimately, as we look kind of more into the future, it's not just the roads that we drive on or the cars that we drive, it's the actual driving that may well be taken over by different engineering aspects as we look at autonomous vehicles. And so, it's as we look at the design of a roadway, just from the very inception of what that roadway is going to do, how many vehicles we anticipate that roadway is going to need to handle, what are the vertical curves, the horizontal curves, what's the surface pavement going to be, how many trucks are going to be on the road. All those questions are questions that have to be answered, as we begin to look at what that, that roadway is going to look like. And certainly, what is that road going to look like in terms of the bicycles or the walkers or, other modes? How is that going to function? The transit system, all those things are handled in the design of those roadways. And then certainly just the design of the vehicles themselves, certainly that's a task that is ongoing by, multiple different levels of and types of engineers, just the driving dynamics, the size of the engines, the type of suspensions, it's all of those things, obviously, engineering plays a huge role in. And then certainly, the autonomous capabilities that are eventually going to be and are coming into vehicles, and the vehicle-to-vehicle communications and the vehicle-to-infrastructure communications. And again, so the engineering, you just really can't separate it at all from this task of transportation. So Amanda, if you want to go to the next slide. So for my own self, I've been working in the field for about 18 years. I've started working for the city of Jefferson, Missouri back in 2003 as a design engineer. And so that was my role at the time, was to begin working on the design of streets, sidewalks, greenway trails, and other facilities, in addition to some of the less glamorous sewer and stormwater pipes. But yeah, so in the ensuing years, I think the city of Jefferson itself has made some strides as we've looked, towards safety and accommodating a larger, diverse mode of transportation. In 2008, we actually built our first roundabout. Perhaps we were a little slow to the game, but certainly, it was something that at the time was rather unique for us. We built it right next to the high school, which some people had told us couldn't happen because the kids would never figure out how to use it. That was not the case. In fact, they were the first ones to figure it out. So, we've been very successful with those since that time. We have built several, and we really believe that the safety features of those over a standard signalized intersection are very important, and would often look to roundabouts as a solution to an intersection problem, before we would look to other solutions. And just very recently, this past summer, the city actually included some complete streets language into our city code for the first time. And so we think that's a nice stride as our city begins to look towards this idea of accommodating greater modes, a number of modes, and the safety of those folks. If you want to go to the next slide. And so for me, like Michael, there's some personal connection to Vision Zero. You can see listed there some names on the screen. Gary was my wife's brother. And he was killed in a car accident, as well as our cousins, Shelley, Matthew, and Dennis. And so, yeah, that's a lot of family. And the other names are folks that I cycle with. I cycle quite a lot. And so those two are all folks that have been involved to one degree or another in crashes with vehicles. Some are just bumps and bruises, and others are paralysis. So again, personally, Vision Zero is very important. Sorry, that's all I have, Amanda.
Thank you, David. We appreciate your story. Erin, you're next.
Okay, can you hear me? Good, okay. All right, you can go ahead and advance to the next slide. All right, well, good morning, and thank you for the opportunity to participate in today's panel discussion on the topic of Vision Zero and the role of driver behavior. Again, my name is Aaron Bartlett. I serve as the Regional Program Manager for the National Highway Traffic Safety Administration. In my work, I provide Missouri with regional outreach and support for their program delivery. The National Highway Safety Administration is responsible for keeping people safe on America's roadways. NHTSA, the other name for the National Highway Traffic Safety Administration, works with federal, state, and local partners to reduce deaths and injuries and economic loss resulting from motor vehicle crashes. NHTSA employs a scientific sound methods to ensure that the quality and the integrity of the data that underpins our regulations and policies is always at the foremost. NHTSA also conducts research on driver behavior, traffic safety, and the development of the most effective and efficient means of bringing about safety improvements. In my position, I collaborate with the Missouri Office of Highway Safety and a multitude of partners by strategically promoting safety on our roadways. NHTSA requires a data-driven process to evaluate and determine safety problem identification. And this in turn leads to the selection of proven safety countermeasures. This includes everything from occupant protection, impaired and distracted driving, to protecting the safety of pedestrians and cyclists on our roadways. And I'll talk a little bit about that more here in a moment. And prior to my work at NHTSA, I worked for the Mid-America Regional Council. I served as a senior transportation planner for 18 years. And I led the safety planning programs and coordinated the active transportation initiatives there. I'd like to talk now about the Vision Zero and a movement and really what driver behavior and the role that education and enforcement plays in keeping our roadways safe. Finally, I'll touch upon emergency technology, autonomous and connected vehicles, and the hope for a safer tomorrow. So next slide. Thank you. Oh, I'm sorry. Yeah, that's perfect. So Destination Safe Summit, the materials that included in that was a definition of what is Vision Zero. And Vision Zero in those terms is a strategic philosophy that aims to eliminate traffic fatalities for all roadway users, drivers, transit users, pedestrians of all ages and abilities, and bicyclists. So I don't think that you can talk about the success of a Vision Zero initiative without understanding what is required, and that's a multidisciplinary approach to transportation safety And that's important because a comprehensive approach means that the combined effectiveness of many approaches is greater than one single approach. So the sum of those things added together is really more effective than any one single approach. NHTSA brings a focus on education and enforcement countermeasures primarily. Law enforcement programs are essential to developing and maintaining a culture of safe driving. NHTSA reports that around 94% of all crashes involve human error or behavior as a leading contributing factor. Research by NHTSA also demonstrates that law enforcement campaigns are most effective when combined with public awareness campaigns to create high visibility exposure. And the hallmark of an effective education program is a positive change in behavior that creates a culture of safety. Strategic programs focus on high-risk demographics such as youth and young adult drivers. Programs focus on behavioral issues such as increasing seatbelt use, avoiding distracted driving, refraining from speeding, and preventing impaired driving. These are all national priorities because of the significance that these have, the attitudes, the beliefs, and ultimately the behavior that we see on our roadways. Next slide. All right. Public education campaigns play a critical role in increasing the awareness of law enforcement campaigns to maximize effectiveness. This is commonly referred to as the Universal High Visibility Enforcement, HVE approach. HVE combines strong public strategic and high visibility law enforcement to address specific traffic safety issues, to educate the public and promote voluntary compliance with the law. HVE has proven to be very effective in creating a general compliance and promoting a culture of safety. Recently, the state of Missouri adopted a new strategic highway safety plan, which I know is going to be presented during this summit, but I wanted to bring out a couple of things out of that. The new Show Me Zero, Driving Missouri Towards Safer Roads plan is a multi-year plan that covers 2021 through 2026. By focusing on behaviors, Missouri is endeavoring to reduce the fatalities and serious injuries on all roadway users, for all roadway users. The new plan has a 4 emphasis primary focus area: occupant protection, distraction, aggressive driving, and impaired driving. And included in that too, it also gets into how we do that for pedestrians and bicyclists as well. Next slide. Perfect. Okay, the contributing evolution of the automotive technology. I'd like to talk a little bit about what that means and how that's, we hope, will be a great safety benefit to all users. But this contributes to the benefit of automated driving systems that one day will handle the whole task of driving when we don't want to or can't do it for ourselves. Fully automated cars and trucks that drive us instead of us driving them will become a reality. These self-driving vehicles ultimately will integrate into the US roadways by progressing through 6 levels of driver assistance technology and advancement in the coming years. NHTSA defines these levels of automation in vehicles with drivers that's capable for human operation and require using these, the Society of Automotive Engineers, or SAE, levels of automation. So as you can see here, there's 6 different automation levels, including 0 as the beginning one. And really what we see happening is an advancement in this type of technology on a daily basis. It's almost as if you read something today, by tomorrow they may be further along with developing these kinds of things. And we do see a lot of effort right now to try to get us to a level 4 or level 5, where you would see vehicles that can do full driving functions under certain circumstances, with the driver having the option of guiding the vehicle, or full automation at level 5, where it can execute all driving tasks. The safety benefits of automated vehicles are paramount. Automated vehicles potentially save and reduce injuries at the root cause of that 95% of serious crashes that result in human error. Automated vehicles have the potential to remove that out of the equation, which will help protect drivers, passengers, as well as bicyclists and pedestrians. When you consider the more than 36,560 people that died on roadways in 2018, you begin to grasp the life-saving benefits of this new driving assisted technology. And with that, I will turn it over to our next speaker.
Thank you, Erin. Ashley, you're up next.
Good morning. Thank you very much for having me today. Happy to be here. So I have been working on mobility related issues, if you don't mind advancing for me. Go to the next slide. For several years now, in addition to CityFi, where we work on mobility and transportation strategies across the country, I'm also the vice chair of the Kansas City Regional Transit Alliance and secretary of Bike Walk KC. I've got my cool swag here. But really importantly, I think what we really have to understand is that inherent to an effective Vision Zero strategy is a solid policy. Next slide, please. So what I wanted to talk to you about today is looking at what it takes to create a strong policy. Amanda, if you don't mind advancing the slide. There we go. The core to all of this is concept, and I think Leah covered it really well in the first session this morning, is this idea that traffic violence is preventable. That's all right, you can keep going. I know sometimes you can get trigger happy, and we're just gonna roll with it. And so if you go to the next slide, I think it's really important to not only think about how that works and then all the different elements that go into it, but I think the reality of the world we have today is as our cars are safer than ever, they're also larger than ever before, people outside of those vehicles are less safe than ever before. We have the equivalent of a 737 dropping out of the sky daily in this country with nearly 40,000 deaths annually. Next slide. And so I think it's really important to not only consider this in terms of what it takes to keep our economy moving and to make a vibrant region, but also to recognize that there are disproportionate impacts on our poorest communities, people that are transit dependent, carless households, as well as just where these crashes are occurring, has a disproportionate impact on our most vulnerable populations. That includes children and elderly as well. Next slide, please. So adopting Vision Zero as a policy is extremely important because it puts a line in the sand. It says that we will no longer tolerate this public health crisis. It is about recognizing that this is not only impacting the quality of life for many people in our cities, but it's taking away from great economic and social potential by putting people at considerable risk just moving around the city. So key to an effective Vision Zero policy is making sure that you have clear, measurable goals, smart goals that are time-based, grounded in our community values, and are regularly evaluated. Because I think, as Leah pointed out earlier this morning, it's really important to understand that this doesn't change overnight. There is a culture change in the way that we behave as drivers and how we act in all modes of transportation. There are rules and design changes that need to happen, but there's also just a broader awareness that the way we move in our communities has evolved considerably with new technologies and new services coming up regularly. Next slide, please. So a good policy will establish that clear commitment at the onset, then look at the data that is going to back your decisions around how to apply that policy in real time and real space across your community. And then from there, you must take action. You cannot just sit and hope that we will get there. And in fact, many cities that have initially adopted Vision Zero have struggled to sustain their commitment to Vision Zero and have not seen the type of benefits that they would like because they have not been able to apply consistent action in meeting the goals of Vision Zero. And then finally, because we have to acknowledge that there is a bit of trial and error, figuring out the right configuration of timing and design at intersections, making sure that we're keeping each person moving safely does take some process improvement. So it's really important to continue to go back and reassess, and that needs to be factored in to the policy itself. Next slide, please. So I think, and it was so great to have Leah on at the beginning, but I think this is something that has resonated with me as I have worked with cities across the country thinking about Vision Zero, and that it takes a commitment for a long time to ensure that we do this. And it's not an additive thing. Vision Zero is embedded really in our processes and rules around safety in the public right of way, and our plans and ordinances around things like complete streets and livable communities. But what we need is the political will to sustain and continue to improve on the way that our roads work. Next slide, please. And then, of course, finally, for me, Vision Zero is important because I am raising 3 children in the River Market. We rely on our sidewalks as play spaces as we move around our neighborhood. And if you have ever walked with a 15-month-old, a 6-year-old, and a very snarky 8-year-old in this picture, it is difficult to guarantee their safety when you have to be concerned about other drivers running off the road or being reckless at intersections, not heeding road rules. When it comes to them riding bikes in bike lanes and not having access to safe infrastructure to serve them, even though they live on a streetcar line, can walk to school or ride their bike to school, it is almost impossible for me to feel comfortable as a mother to ensure that my children will have an opportunity to be, active and fruitful members of our community for years to come if I can't feel comfortable with them walking down the street. And so on behalf of my children and every child in this city, I believe that Vision Zero is not only something that we absolutely must do, but it is the most critical public health crisis that we have had and we've coexisted with for too long. And it is no longer acceptable for us to allow this to continue to happen. And so I deeply appreciate the work of Councilman Bunch and others in the region to advance the principles of Vision Zero as we look forward to a safer future for everyone. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Ashley. Councilman Bunch, I will turn the session over to you.
Thanks, Amanda, and thanks everyone for joining us, and thanks for the panelists for these great presentations and sharing their knowledge and experience. And just want to make sure that everyone is hearing me okay. So I don't have any PowerPoint presentation today. I just wanted to talk a little bit about my role in this. I kind of scrolled through the participants to see who was on here. I saw a lot of familiar names and from a lot of different backgrounds. And so some of you may know me from my previous life at Bike Walk AC as a policy director and co-founder. But now I serve in a different role, one that I consider to be really exciting and I think impactful on the community of Kansas City. But I'm this 4th District City Council person for Kansas City. And for those of you who aren't from Kansas City, the 4th District encompasses downtown, midtown, the Country Club Plaza, the historic Northeast, a little snippet of Clay County up north of the river. So it really is one of the most, I would say it is the most diverse council district in terms of race and ethnicity, but also land use types and street types. It's the most densely populated district. And so I argue that it's the most walkable. And as Ashley pointed out earlier in relation to her family, my wife and kids live, I think, a fairly similar life. We walk to school when school is not virtual. Actually, we do still walk to school because we're in a pod with another family. So I walked with my kids this morning. And walking is an important part of our lives. And so it is personal to me. And so, I came from, as I mentioned earlier, I came from the background of bicycle and pedestrian advocacy, and Vision Zero has always sort of been something that I cared a lot about. A few years ago, I was aided by my organization, Bike Walk AC, and many other stakeholders in passing the Kansas City's first complete streets ordinance that I feel is one of the strongest ordinances in the country that changed municipal code to really require complete streets elements to be incorporated into every single project. Unfortunately, that's not enough. It's not enough to say that we're going to put a sidewalk in anytime development happens, or when this street gets resurfaced, we'll consider a road diet. So we had to add a lot of extra things into there, but also we have to understand, like, how do we prioritize in with limited resources, especially now with the budget being so uncertain because of revenue decline, thanks to the COVID pandemic. So Vision Zero, to me, is one way that we can start to really incorporate a new prioritization framework for how do we decide where to implement those complete streets elements. And so just a few months ago, with the help of Michael and Ashley, did a lot of the heavy lifting for our complete streets resolution. The City Council unanimously adopted the Vision Zero resolution, which has a few elements. And I just wanted to, at the outset, say that a Vision Zero resolution is just the beginning of the policy. We have to follow it up, and we're following it up with clear action. And so I wanted to just outline some of the things that are included in our Vision Zero resolution, and I'll make sure that everyone has a copy of that. You don't have to start with a resolution or an ordinance, but it was a way for us as a city council to establish this as an important priority. It's not codified. It's a resolution, but we often use resolutions on city council in Kansas City to establish sort of big policy goals. And so one of the first ones, the first very clear measurable policy goal is eliminating traffic fatalities to zero, completely eliminating them by 2030. Ambitious, absolutely. Vision Zero is about being ambitious, and it's about eliminating traffic violence, be it fatalities or serious injuries or disabling injuries. So that was the first thing. The second thing is the creation, the mandate, more or less, to create a Vision Zero action plan, which would look at data and identify where our most dangerous corridors are, where our most dangerous intersections are, and focus on those first. And that's really, I think, the hallmark of a good Vision Zero policy is it looks at the most dangerous places in the city and works at those first. So I've heard some people describe that as reactive, and I don't believe that's reactive. I believe that that's making tactical, if not strategic, investments into your built environment to change streets. And I want to also mention that in that, I said earlier about the Complete Streets Ordinance, Complete Streets, and there's so much guidance out there. I encourage you to look at NACTO, Street Design Guidance. There's several great books that they've published. Those are the tools. Those are the toolboxes that we have in order to make our streets safer. This Vision Zero action plan that our resolution calls for is a way, again, to prioritize how we implement that toolbox. And then a third point is equity. We know that traffic fatalities, especially those affecting pedestrians and bicyclists, affect communities of color and communities of low wealth at disproportionate levels. You can look at any city that's done a Vision Zero study and looked at where their high injury corridors are, and you'll see that they are in the most disinvested communities. They're in the poorest communities, and they're in generally the Black and brown communities. And that's the case here. Just without even doing a full analysis, we know that that's the case here. I'll use Independence Avenue as an example. It's one of the most deadly streets in the city for pedestrians. And it borders a large chunk of my district. It's the most diverse part of our city. And it's got some of the highest free and reduced lunch, the poorest health outcomes. And yet we've created a street that literally kills people. And so I want to make sure that equity is clearly baked in to every single process that we create. Another component of equity, though, is enforcement. A lot of Vision Zero policies and Vision Zero plans in the United States started off with a very heavy-handed enforcement component. We know that enforcement leads to profiling. It leads to often police brutality. And so it's important that equity is considered and that enforcement is considered within that context, the context of a very diverse community, as is the case in my district, and in particular the East Side, where we know that Black and brown individuals are pulled over disproportionately by law enforcement. So we want to make sure that enforcement is not something that is central to the policy or the plan. And I do want to remind everyone that the more stuff we put on law enforcement, like traffic stops and things of that nature, because our built environment is not built in such a way that it provides safe travel for everyone, we're putting a lot of burden on our law enforcement. And so that's another reason why we shouldn't rely on enforcement to do the work of Vision Zero. We've got to make sure that our streets are safe by design. And so that's a big part of the equity component. And then there's deadlines. I want to reiterate that deadlines are very important for when you're crafting a resolution in the way that we did, making sure that there's a report back to the council in our case. However your legislative process works in your city, you can sort of work through that. Again, it doesn't necessarily take a resolution. It just takes leadership from someone, be it, maybe it's your public works director, or maybe it is the mayor or a city council member. And so that's sort of the components of ours, of our Vision Zero resolution. So the next steps are, there's a task force that was created as part of the Vision Zero action plan. And that task force is meeting fairly regularly right now with both city staff, external partners, including the Bike Walk KC, the transit agency, transit advocates, and some elected officials as well. So to make sure that we have a multi-sector working group. And I want to wrap up by just saying that what led me to this approach, not only do we know that it's successful if done well and done and invested in strategically, but I don't believe that someone like Ezreal Hill should be playing in his front yard and lose his life simply because he fell down the slope of the front yard and into a street. That's a design flaw. That's a problem with how we build our streets. And Vision Zero is the recognition that we've done things the wrong way when it comes to traffic safety for a long, long time. So we have to take a systems change approach, not simply just asking drivers to be nicer. And there's a lot of talk earlier, and Ashley mentioned it, that the focus has really been on protecting people inside the vehicles. Cars have gotten safer if you are the occupant of that vehicle. At the same time, vehicles have gotten bigger, they've gotten more powerful. I don't believe that anyone should need a 400 horsepower minivan, but they exist. And as a result, we are seeing pedestrians killed at an alarming rate. We're seeing pedestrians and all traffic fatalities increasing in line with violent crime. And so Vision Zero is a way forward. It's a way to make bold action and make bold measurable goals. But it's a way to systematically change how our transportation system works and makes it safer for everyone. So with that, I'll turn it back over to Amanda, and I think we're going to hit our lightning round here in just a second.
Thank you so much, Eric. Yeah, we're good to go into that next session. So it's still you, man.
All right, I get to keep talking here. All right, so now we are going to do some Q&A with our panelists, and I get to be the moderator. So that's always dangerous territory when you hand me the mic to moderate a conversation with some really smart people. But we'll just go ahead and start off with we'll go in order with who presented. And I know I'm going to put Ashley first because I know that she's going to have to go before too long, and I want to make sure we get her in the hopper before. So I'm going to start off with you, Ashley. You talked a little bit about creating a Vision Zero policy and had a great sort of flow chart there. But what are some obstacles to actually implementing that Vision Zero policy? I know you did some great work in Los Angeles and we're fairly tied there, but what in your experience in Kansas City or other cities do you see as being some obstacles to the actual implementation side?
Absolutely. So I think, there are a couple obstacles that immediately occur to me are this idea that this is additive to our existing policy framework and therefore requires an exorbitant, reallocation of resources when resources are extremely tight. And I would beg to differ. I believe that this commitment to safety is foundational in the way that our engineers are trained, our community planners are trying to design safe communities. So I believe that it's really important to get out ahead of that debate. The challenge, however, is because we are lacking clear data to help make the case for Vision Zero, because Vision Zero serves often as a catalyst for going out, collecting and analyzing the data, developing maps, for example, around high injury networks. And in Los Angeles, it was quite fascinating when they started to develop that mapping, which did look at everything from socioeconomic impacts, transit ridership, things like that. They discovered that more than 65% of severe and fatal crashes happen on just 6% of their roads. So when you think about this massive area in the city of Los Angeles, which is quite extensive, that to be able to then hone in and address in a very strategic way where our most dangerous streets are, it's a great way to do that. But getting that data can be frustrating and is not always readily available. So it's really important to kind of, sometimes you just have to go out there and make the claim, we are going to work on this and set that goal of Vision Zero, but it will take some time to help with identifying the data. And then finally, as I mentioned earlier, I think the other major barrier to these policies is sustaining support. We hear a lot about NIMBYs, for example, that come out and say, no, do not change speed limits or roadway configurations. The idea of narrowing a roadway often has the perception that you're going to slow down my commute, when the reality is that it actually, by maybe just a few seconds, may slow you down. It may actually make it easier to hit the right timing of the signals, and by being safer, ensures a more routinely regular commute time. So I think it's really important to figure out how you can appeal to the various audiences to help with sustaining that. And that's one thing that I thought was really helpful in the way that Kansas City, Missouri approached their resolution, is that we didn't just look to one stakeholder group. It wasn't one group of advocates that wanted to see this policy in place, but it's everyone from organizations like The Whole Person that are working on the task force, representing people living with disabilities. It's about people who are reliant on transit to get to and from our work, which in an era now where it's more important ever, these are essential workers and transit is an essential service to make sure that it's safe. So I think, the barriers, just to quickly wrap it up, is that the perception that it's additive, that it takes a little bit of work to identify the areas of concern, and then finally sustaining support. It really takes a broad coalition and a very systemic view. And so it's important to continue to build in multiple approaches to addressing Vision Zero goals.
Great. Thank you, Ashley. Move on to Michael Kelly. We talked a lot about how traffic violence disproportionately affects communities of color. You coming from the advocacy side, but sort of bringing that bridge between the community and the policymakers. How do you engage with communities who may not have the time to spend at a virtual meeting, or may be skeptical, or may have other priorities that may not see this as a top priority for their community? But what advice do you have to folks on engaging with our communities of color, our communities of low wealth?
Sure. Well, I think that it starts with having these conversations before something pops off. I think that a lot of times when people come into a community, the perception is that well, I've been trying to get a hold of you for weeks or months because of all these other traffic issues, and you're just now coming to me with something that doesn't really speak to those other issues. So I think that it has to begin with establishing as early as possible a relationship with communities, and understanding that when you come in, even if you are coming in on the early portion of that, you should not be surprised, turn off, or irritated if people come with passion, if they come with criticism, and to your point, Councilman, with a bit of skepticism, because a lot of times the people that you're seeking to get buy-in from want to see these changes. It's just that it has been ignored for so long that they are reduced even further to more basic needs that sometimes feel divorced from these other issues. So something that often comes up in our conversations with folks is, the issue of affordable housing. Like, I don't care about, I don't necessarily think that a safer street is going to keep me from being evicted. And so for us, that means that we need to do the work of specifically tying the issue of transportation and affordable, safe neighborhoods to the issues of affordable housing. And we've been able to do that to an extent by having those conversations and trying to build those relationships with groups in the area that we know speak to those issues. That would be groups like the KC Tenants, as well as LISC, that also work in affordable housing. It also includes neighborhood associations like Ivanhoe or Marlboro that want to create a safe community and want to also understand how transportation fits into that. I often think that the challenge is that if you're presenting it as a prescription, as something that I'm giving to you so you can fix your problem, you'll never get buy-in. But it has to come from a space of, we know that this is an issue in your community. Work with us, and we want your input, we want your feedback, we want your criticism, because you're really only going to get buy-in, you're really only going to get that support that you need to carry a project forward, to do something like a road diet that Ashley mentioned, if you're also able to tie it in and paint the picture of how it will address some of the broader issues that people care about.
Thank you, Michael. Some great insight there. I really appreciate that. On to David. You were coming from a smaller city, the city of Jefferson, as I love hearing employees there, staffers refer to it. So in this, it being in a smaller city, I'm sure that you have to be relatively creative with funding sources and make good use of federal funding, but also some local funding. But doing quick, easy things sometimes is a ticket. What examples do you have, or what advice do you have for municipalities here on the engineering side to improve the process or speed up the process to do inexpensive, quick build projects or quick changes to the built environment to make it safer by design?
Yeah, when you first started asking the question and said the word quick, that was the financial part of that was the first thing that came to mind. Usually if you're doing something quick, it probably also needs to be somewhat inexpensive, because gathering the funding to do a project is really the part that takes a long time and takes a lot of time to develop. So yeah, if you wanted to look at something that's relatively inexpensive and then I think has a positive effect, one of the things is signal timing, for instance, especially on a corridor where you have a series of signals in a row. If you can retime those signals to basically train people to go the speed limit, so if I have them in sequence such that if I do the speed limit, whether it be 30 or whatever it is, and when I get to the next signal, it's going to be green instead of red, you sort of trained me to drive the speed limit. But if it's a poorly timed system where I need to, I'm smart enough to realize that if I go 37 miles an hour, I can hit the next green light, Whereas if I go the speed limit, I'm not, then basically I'm training people to do the wrong thing. And so, certainly, and not all towns, certainly Jefferson City has a very limited number of signals that are in sequence like that. And I'm sure that as you get into the more rural regions of the KC area, you don't have that option. But, certainly there probably are corridors where there's a series of signals. And so making sure the timing of those is such that the progression works through them at the speed limit. Certainly I think it's very beneficial. And then too, just in terms of rear end crashes, if we are, are able to platoon those cars through those intersections and not have a lot of starting and stopping that would, create the opportunity for rear end accidents. Certainly I think that's a sort of a quick fix, if you're having that sort of a problem. I guess another thing, kind of as we look into perhaps a little bit more of the rural areas, I think we have a real opportunity in terms of a better signing and striping on our roads, particularly striping. As cars develop, and Aaron was talking about, the advancement of autonomous capabilities, and a lot of newer cars these days, even if they're not, autonomous, they certainly have lane detection systems and lane departure capabilities that really rely on the striping that's on the pavement in order to assist in keeping those cars in the lanes that they're supposed to be in. And so, if we maintain better striping, then certainly those autonomous features can work a lot better. And two, just in poor visibility environments, rain, dark, people who are aging and whose eyes aren't quite as strong as they used to be, certainly the striping just gives better visual cues of where you're supposed to be on the roadway. And particularly in an urban environment with, glare and otherwise from all the other lights or headlights, I think that has the opportunity of preventing crashes as well if we do that. And that's relatively an inexpensive, quick fix. And then probably another one that I think Ashley maybe alluded to a little bit, the possibility of just reducing speed limits overall, particularly in residential areas. It wouldn't necessarily be that hard to do, but for the fact that people probably would be, would express some opposition to that. And so the action itself is probably quick. The getting to the action is something that would probably take a lot of political will to make happen. But I think there too, the benefits for, the vulnerable road users, whether it be cyclists or pedestrians, certainly, a reduction in speed as little as 5 miles an hour makes a huge difference in the outcome of a crash were it to happen in those environments. So those are probably, three things that would be, relatively inexpensive and relatively quick, although in engineering terms, really, those things don't necessarily always happen together. So, but yeah, and then, kind of going on to a bigger idea, certainly I would think road diets have been mentioned. And so you have the possibility of those, providing additional space for other users, whether it be cyclists, pedestrians, and kind of reducing conflicts at intersections. Certainly that is a very valuable tool, although it probably is a little bit longer term, higher expense. So, but those are some ideas.
Thanks, David.
May I add to that just one thing? I think there are short-term demonstration mechanisms that organizations like Better Block, for example, can help with making it possible for communities to imagine what alternatives look like by redesigning the roadway in a temporary fashion. These installations can be very impactful, and many cities have created the pipeline of using the demonstration as an opportunity to have that discussion with the community and then affect permanent changes. We've seen considerable responses from cities all over the country during COVID, where stay-at-home orders were forcing us outside for any type of exercise that we could get. And the work that has been done to open up our streets for more types of uses has created opportunities to envision that future at a very different scale. We've got cities committing to building hundreds of miles of bike lanes, for example. The gender gap, for example, in how we move in New York City is fascinating to see what's happened. And bike share, the uptick since New York has made it easier to ride on city streets by opening up more infrastructure to accommodate bike, has meant that there's more women now than ever using bike share. So recognizing that short-term things can be a little bit more grassroots in partnership with city departments, that mobilizing these kind of short-term interventions can actually create pathways for a longer-term change.
Thanks, Ashley. I was actually gonna kick it over to you for some insight. So thank you for doing that. It's interesting to hear some discussion about traffic speed. We know that the traffic speed is a really the faster a vehicle is going, the more likely a pedestrian or someone outside the car is likely to be seriously injured or killed. And I think at about 40 miles per hour, and why speed is so important, about 40 miles per hour, I think it's almost 90% of pedestrians who are hit by a vehicle going that quickly are killed. Whereas at 20 miles per hour, it's less than 10%. And I may have those numbers slightly wrong, but I think it's that sort of level of magnitude. And why things such as signal timing are important and easy maybe fixes. But I did want to add a little plug for some of the things that we've done recently in Kansas City in terms of striping. Since I took office, we've been able to do some quick implementation of bike lanes at pretty minimal cost just by coordinating with our resurfacing schedule. So that takes some level of coordination with city staff and different departments, and also some political will. And so a road diet, the trusty road diet, going from 4 lanes to 3 or 2, is a really we know for a fact that that's a really important countermeasure for improving safety for all users. And so we've seen some pretty amazing success with really inexpensive, quick projects just by coordinating with road resurfacing. So on the issue of countermeasures, I wanted to go over to Erin right now. Erin, we haven't talked since you've moved over to NHTSA, so congrats on the change of scenery for you. But what sort of countermeasures and what kind of efforts do you see as being more effective around what are policies around traffic safety that you think are effective in reducing traffic crashes? What countermeasures, what sort of things do you see as the most effective pathway forward? And I know a lot of your talk was focused more on driver behavior. Could you speak on that, but also how maybe driver behavior is influenced by the built environment?
Yeah, absolutely. Well, I think I like I mentioned before, I do think it's a comprehensive approach to safety that works best. I think one of the things I'd like to kind of point out with all of this too is that originally when the Vision Zero effort began in Sweden, the emphasis was very much on the built environment, creating basically roadways that were very forgiving, that helped reduce speed. And when you did have a crash or whatever, you tried to reduce the impact of that crash. You tried to create a situation where people is more forgiving, they could walk away from it. That was very effective. And as the Vision Zero movement really moved into the United States, the switch from that more towards speed and speed enforcement and that kind of impetus, because I think people felt like maybe it was going to take longer to do the infrastructure piece of it. But I feel like you've got to really have a combined approach in how you look at these kinds of things. We do know that speeding is a real issue. It's in almost more than 30% of all fatalities, especially important for pedestrians and the survivorship there. getting those speeds down is important. So definitely through, road diets, traffic calming, roundabouts, you know, all the different things that you can do to improve the crossing of roadways for pedestrians. All of these things are important. And, creating that culture of safety and understanding that it's important for people to drive the speed limit as well. One of the things I've noticed through this year with the COVID-19 pandemic is that we changed overnight people's perception and their ability or willingness to wear masks and things like that. If we had the same kind of commitment towards reducing roadway fatalities and really created a culture where it's not acceptable for people to speed, and we know when people are doing it, right? I feel like we could make a tremendous reduction in the amount of fatalities that are on the road. In fact, what we did see with COVID-19, the stay-at-home orders and the reduction in travel, we expected the fatality numbers to go down significantly. They did drop during that period, but what we also saw was a reduction in the amount of traffic that was on the road. Those folks that were on the road began speeding even more. And because law enforcement were not out there enforcing the laws because of the fear of spreading COVID-19 or some of the other issues that were involved with that, we began to see excessive speeding. In fact, we started seeing people driving above 100 miles an hour on some of the interstates. And that kind of speeding, while not at that level on arterial streets, has certainly gone up. And so as a result of that, I think the culture has changed. And we've got to get back to a message that reinforces the importance of people making good decisions and not speeding and doing that really everywhere, because everyone deserves to be able to live in a community where they're not afraid to cross the street and where they're able to get out and bicycle and do that without the fear, or even any trip that you take, So I'm trying to kind of get back to your original question, Eric, but I think, it from my perspective, I think it takes a comprehensive approach. I think you need to be doing things with the safe systems approach for the roadways. I think that with education and law enforcement and those types of campaigns, you need to make sure that people understand the consequences of driving too fast. And then you need to make sure that those laws are in place and that people are abiding by them. So when you do that with other partners at the table, and you have a culture of safety, that's when the numbers start to go down, and that's a pathway towards Vision Zero, I believe.
Great, thank you, Aaron. I want to switch over, and I know Ashley has to leave a little early. And Ashley, are you still here?
Yes, I'm here.
All right, I'm gonna ask you one more question here, and we're gonna, I think, switch over to a lightning round here for everyone. So, because we're coming up on just about a little over 10 minutes left. Ashley, one of the questions that we've just gotten in from actually from Mario from KCMO asks, data is critical. What information do we have specifically to help everyone see the areas that need to be prioritized? So where do you see, I know that you've done a lot with data, you do a lot of work with data, and you feel it's very important, but what do you see as the role of data in Vision Zero, and why is it so important?
Well, I'm so glad you directed that question, because I was actually typing a response to Mario in the chat box, so that's perfect. So Mario, thanks for the question. Absolutely, data is really essential. By law, and there are quite a bit of data that is captured already. Organizations such as MARC have already been tracking for years quite a bit of data across the region in terms of roadway safety. Also, there's quite a bit of data that comes through emergency services. The response to incidents can provide some insight. The challenge is that not all data is equal, and nor is it of the highest quality. So it's really important to set a clear standard for what the minimum type of information is. Who's involved in the crashes, where it happened. Being very kind of specific can help understand and pinpoint the locations of where the incidents are occurring. And then layering things like aspects of street design, local land uses. What is it, a school nearby? Is it a transit stop? What are the other things that are happening in that area can start to inform your decision making. And finally, looking at socioeconomic data is extremely important. When we looked at data in Los Angeles, for example, the most disproportionate impacts, those 65% of severe fatalities, injuries and fatalities that were happening on just 6% of the streets were happening in our poorest neighborhoods. So it was really important to look at that data. So high injury network, that analysis is really essential. And it was actually a public health department that came up with a really good methodology in San Francisco to analyze the impact on our community health of these types of severe crashes and things like that. So data is essential. It will help you not only with kind of understanding where to prioritize improvements, but it will also help you with analyzing the impacts when you do make a change. It's important for us to go back and say, okay, we've applied this measure. Has it actually resulted in the outcomes we were hoping to achieve? And if not, then we must work to continue to improve it. So data is an ongoing process. And I know through the Casey Moe task force, they are actively working to collect that data, much of which is already in-house, but then there are other agencies that already have that information available as well to share.
Great, thank you, Ashley. I'm going to go back to Michael now. A question from the chat is really about how do we. This is going to take a real shift in thinking. What do you, Michael? What do you feel is a good way to sort of sell Vision Zero to the public? Because there's always a pushback. We heard earlier about people being afraid of change. What's a way to make Vision Zero a little less maybe technocratic and a little bit more accessible to the average person? How are you doing that at Bike Walk KC?
I think part of what we're doing is we're doing our best to tie it into other issues that people already care about. So kind of going back to what I had said earlier, beyond the housing, I think something that's beginning to emerge more in sort of the public consciousness here is the issue of climate change. And so with something like transportation being our largest source of greenhouse gas emissions in both the region and the country, talking about things like Vision Zero and specifically how we create safer communities for greener forms of transportation is one way that we can talk about doing that. I think another way that we talk about it is if people want to talk dollars and cents, then we should have that discussion. We should talk about the fact that when we don't invest in these changes, that's millions of dollars that we generate annually from insurance, from hospitalization, because we don't have safe streets. So I know that there are sometimes people who complain that you're not doing enough to talk about the lives that are being lost, but for a lot of people who oppose this, they simply don't care. And so if it needs to become a question of money, that oftentimes is something that is able to convince folks that, maybe we have our apprehensions about this, but we also know that as we're trying to recover from this pandemic, be it in Casey Moe, Overland Park, Shawnee, Liberty, wherever, we need to be more strategic with the money that we do have. And so if this is one way that we can build a safer system that ultimately will save us more money over the long run, then that is something else that we should be considering as well.
Great, thank you, Michael. I wanted to just quickly read a comment from my friend Sheila Styron. It's in the chat box. We need to influence the public as much as the anti-smoking campaign and drunk driving awareness. And I think that really touches on something that Ashley mentioned earlier about so often this data collection and Vision Zero is coming from a public health perspective. I think that just as we do with so many other public health issues, we need to treat this as such. So thank you for that comment, Sheila. I'm going to ask David another question here. A little off script, but I'm kind of like tying together a few of the questions here, sort of about speeding. As an engineer, what do you see as some of the more effective tools for engineering the streets to be safer by design? How do we influence that behavior? You touched on traffic signal timing earlier. How has that worked maybe in Jefferson City, or what other more effective tools do you think there are in the toolbox?
Yeah, it is a really difficult answer, and I'm not for sure that I have the golden bullet. It's very interesting. We've talked about the pandemic and its effects, and here in Jefferson City, ultimately this summer we have received a lot more comment from folks about people who are speeding in their neighborhoods, and so we don't really have ability to get the data to explain why that is, but in part we're thinking that in some ways people are at home more, and so they're working from home, their kids are at home, they're perhaps out in the yard more, people are more cognizant of the people who are driving by, and so perhaps they're not speeding any more than they used to be, but people are there to perceive them doing it. But it's a tough thing to try to get people to slow down. Ultimately, a lot of the things that we have in our toolbox to do that are things that actually work to make the driving task harder, whether those be chicanes or bump outs at the intersections or narrowing the street, or a lot of that is basically forcing the driver to pay more attention to what they're doing, because we're going to be throwing a lot of stuff at you. And so in some ways then you have to stop and wonder, well, now I've suddenly made the driving task harder. Have I introduced elements that are then going to be obstacles that these the people might crash into? And so it's a very delicate balance, I think, in trying to get people to slow down. And so honestly, have we been successful in Jefferson City at addressing those problems? I would have to say that we have been less than successful in a lot of cases, unfortunately. And so, certainly we've tried various things, but again, for us, it unfortunately does go back to funding. And I know there are various opportunities to do sort of temporary fixes and to try to to examine whether or not narrowing the street would work, or if adding a bump out there would work, or but in some ways even those temporary fixtures go away at some point, and people seem to tend to go back to their old habits. So unfortunately I don't know that I have an answer to that question, but certainly having elements that force people to focus on their driving rather than other activities while they're in the car, I think. And the other part of that too, ultimately, I think, Michael talked about education and encouragement. And so I really think that ultimately, if we had more people who were drivers who also spent time as walkers or spent time as cyclists, such that they were personally aware of the vulnerabilities that exist when you are one of those other modes, I really think that has an opportunity to translate into a more courteous, a more aware driver. But so to what extent do we need to encourage those modes and provide for those modes to sort of create a safer environment, simply because we've now invited more people to be part of that? So I don't know if that answers the question, but there's certainly, we have a long way to go here on our end as well.
You're muted there. There we go.
Yeah, said the host muted me, so I guess I got kicked off. Aaron, real quick, I think the answer should be real quick, but do you think that a goal of 0 fatalities is truly achievable in a city like Kansas City or any community in the Midwest here?
I believe there are a lot of promising ways to get there, but I don't know of any community in the world that has ever gotten to Vision Zero, that has ever actually achieved no fatalities. So I think as long as people are making poor decisions, driving intoxicated, not wearing a seatbelt, speeding down the road, whatever it might be, we know that basically these things are preventable, but the choices that are made a lot of times lead into and contribute to a crash that has a fatality involved. That's where we've got to get to a community or a culture of safety that makes that paramount. And I loved what Sheila said here about, smoking cessation. And how did that really work? Everybody knows that smoking is bad for you, and yet people continue to do it. It wasn't until really the price of cigarettes, when those started to go up, that's when we really began to see people deciding not to smoke as much. And so it's something that with speeding, I think we've got to realize that it's going to take more than just telling people that they shouldn't speed, but the attitudes that are out there is that it's completely safe, or it's my prerogative to do that. We've got to make sure that we have good laws in place, and that we look at the data, we look where the crashes are occurring, we look at where the fatalities are happening, and we prioritize. We have to be strategic in our approach in looking to make those communities and those corridors safer by investing in better roadway design, and at the same time getting education out there for people and making sure that the laws are followed. And when we do that, we are then moving towards Vision Zero. But yes, I do hope that we can get to Vision Zero, a true zero, and I do feel like there's promise in some of the technologies that are coming. But we are going to, it's going to take a while to get there. And we just have to continue to work and do our best every day.
For sure.
Great. Thanks, Aaron. I'll kick it back over to Amanda because we're just a little past time, but thank you. Thank you everyone on this panel. A really great insight.
Yes, a virtual round of applause for each of you. Thank you so much for doing this today. I did put the link in the chat for everyone. Our next session is going to be the session title is A Case for Equality on Wednesday, November 4th at 2 p.m. So we hope to see you there. And thanks again to our panel for sharing with us today.
Thank you.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you all.